and we're gonna get to it. Okay, so the format for tonight's program is going to begin with a Pechakucha style of storytelling, where each guest is going to have roughly 5 minutes to share a story and a response to a prompt that we provided. After storytelling is concluding, we're going to move into small breakout rooms where you're going to have the opportunity to talk more freely with our guests. You can ask questions, you can follow up with what they shared, and just in general connect with one another. I am really excited about the 5 alumni who are joining us tonight. They are bringing great wisdom that is reflecting a diversity of identities, experiences, and perspectives from all of the different things they've experienced. They work in very different spaces, and I'm excited what we can learn from each of them. So when we asked our guests to participate, we provided a pretty broad prompt. We asked, can you share what you've observed, experienced, or envisioned for the future about making policy come to life in practice? Stories that they might be sharing could be from personal, professional, or other types of experiences. We just want to hear, when have they been inspired? Maybe they've seen something that really connected and came together to create impact, or maybe it was an aha moment where things became very real and tangible for them. Each storyteller, their approach is going to be different. What they choose to share is going to be different. And so I'm excited to hear how everybody is interpreting this themselves. I'm going to begin with the bios for our first 3 speakers, who will then go ahead and share their stories. After which point I'll share the bios for our next 2 speakers, and then they're going to share their stories. I am going to read their bios, so please bear with me as I'm doing that. They have some pretty amazing accomplishments. So our first storyteller for tonight is Liz Harding Chow. Liz is the Data and Evaluation Director at Away Home Washington, where she works closely with communities to improve data systems to ensure every young person experiencing homelessness is counted in real time. She holds a Bachelor of Arts majoring in Japanese and Chinese from the University of Melbourne and an MPA from the Evans School. Liz immigrated to the US in 2016, but is a proud Melbourneian, I probably slaughtered that, at heart. Amy Hirataka will be our second storyteller. As the Chief Staff Executive for the Washington Association for Criminal Defense Lawyers, Amy is responsible for working with the board to set and implement association goals, fiscal management, CLE and other program development, redesigning and developing member services, hiring and supervising staff and contractors, and overall management of the association. She furthers WACDL's mission to protect the rights of the accused by supporting criminal defense attorneys. Amy's career has included lobbying, policy analysis, community outreach and engagement, and fundraising. She's served on the board of the Asian Pacific Islander Community Leadership Foundation and as the chair of the City of Seattle Community Technology Advisory Board. James Bush is going to be our third storyteller tonight. James currently serves as the Assistant Superintendent of Equity, Partnerships, and Engagement for Seattle Public Schools. He was appointed to this role in January of 2021. So as head of the division, James oversees 3 departments: racial equity advancement, stakeholder engagement, and school and community partnerships, which is where he served previously as executive director. The division supports key work in the district's 5-year strategic plan, including changing broken systems and undoing legacies of racism in public education, and fostering inclusive and authentic engagement with families and students. Prior to joining Seattle Public Schools in 2016, James served as the Neighborhood Programs Manager at the City of Seattle Department of Neighborhoods, where he managed a variety of community building programs, including the Neighborhood District Coordinator Program, Neighborhood Matching Fund, People's Academy for Community Engagement, and Public Outreach and Engagement Liaison Programs. James has built a career of strengthening community connections and increasing systems abilities to meet the needs of our students and families. He served as a key leader in the City of Seattle's Race and Social Justice Initiative for 3 Seattle mayors, and is committed to improving educational outcomes for SPS students, parents, partners, and communities. A Seattle native, James grew up in Seattle's Rainier Beach neighborhood and attended the University of Washington, where he earned a bachelor's degree in psychology and an MPA from the Evans School. With that, I am going to go ahead and pass the mic off to Liz, who is going to kick things off.
Thanks, Shannon. Can you all hear me okay? Awesome. Well, hello, I am Liz. I use she, her pronouns. And today I'm going to be talking about how for the past 3 years, I have been supporting 4 communities in Washington State, Pierce, Spokane, Yakima, and Walla Walla counties to prevent and end youth homelessness. In my work, seeing policy in practice means seeing system change in action. It's about creating policy and programming that pushes communities to better serve young people. Essentially, we change the things that don't work, we address inequities, and most importantly, we get young people housed as quickly as possible. For this talk, I'm going to zoom in pretty closely into one of our programs called the Centralized Diversion Fund, or CDF for short. And it's a program that we worked with our 4 communities to implement just over 1 year ago. I'm going to be talking about 3 ways in which this program has not only housed over 420 youth and young adult households, but it has fundamentally shifted our community's homeless response systems. So the CDF provides flexible funds to stably house young people outside of the homelessness system quickly. Trained providers work with young people together to have a diversion conversation where they come up with creative housing solutions that draw on their natural support systems. So for example, a young person, they're staying with their grandma on their grandma's couch, and their grandma says, well, I'm having struggles making ends meet. So if I can get $500 to cover your groceries and $1,000 for a couple of months rent, that means you can stay with me. And so the CDF provides a check to that young person's grandma for the $1,500 that allows the young person to stay stably housed before they ever even enter homelessness. And most importantly, that check is processed within 72 hours. And that processing time for being stably housed is virtually unheard of in homeless response systems. So firstly, we designed the CDF program to be as easy as possible for young people to access. So this means that young people don't need to provide proof of homelessness, and there is no cap on the amount of funds that they can access. So this is really important when thinking of the CDF as a racial equity tool, because we're removing the ability of providers to say, you are worth $1,000 because you're white or very white adjacent, and you are worth not $5,000 because you are Black and you have a history that I don't agree with, or you're LGBTQ. And I personally don't believe that you deserve $5,000 to be permanently housed. So we take that ability of providers to judge their clients based on race, other demographic factors, whether they're pregnant and parenting young people, by ensuring that there's no cap on the amount of funds that young people can request in order to be safely and stably housed. The amount of money provided is purely based on what it takes to get that young person stably housed. So if they say it's going to take $5,000 and their landlord confirms that they owe $5,000 in back rent, and that if they pay that, they can remain in their housing, then that $5,000 is paid. And even with no cap, the average amount of funds dispersed to each youth and young adult household is around $1,600. Secondly, the CDF ensures that young people who are couch surfing or at risk of homelessness have access to housing too. So one of the major issues with the homeless response system is that it prioritizes people to receive housing services often based on vulnerability indexes or scores. So young people who are not yet homeless or who might be couch surfing with grandma are not considered homeless enough, and I put that in inverted commas because it's ridiculous, in order to access housing services. So this is particularly an issue that affects young people of color. Over 65% of young people served by the CDF are either couch surfing or at risk, and the majority are Black or Latinx. So thirdly, anyone in a community can be trained to access the CDF and not just homeless service providers. So this means that young people don't even need to interact with the homeless response system, which is historically anti-Black and racist, in order to be stably housed. So policy and practice is the Centralized Diversion Fund in action. It's seeing our communities break down arbitrary bureaucratic barriers that prevent young people from getting the services they need quickly. And it's only one way that we're supporting Washington communities to prevent and end youth homelessness. I'm going to drop our data dashboard link and our first annual report link that I co-wrote with my colleagues in the chat if you'd like to learn more, and I look forward to talking with you more in the breakout rooms. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz, for breaking that down for us and sharing that. Now we're going to go ahead and shift and to hear from Amy.
Okay, I am trying the Pecha Kucha storytelling method here. So I'm going to share my screen, and I think like as soon as I start the slideshow, the clock starts ticking. So Shannon, if you could tell me now that I've hit slideshow, does it look okay?
Yes, we can see you.
All right, so I think there's a timer set, so I'm just going to jump right in. I plan to tell you two stories of policy and practice or policy change. The first is personal somewhat, and the second is professional. One took 45 years and one took 17 years. These are my grandparents, or pictures of my grandparents and their siblings. They were Nisei, which means that they were second generation Japanese Americans born to immigrant parents. They were married in 1941. They farmed in Bellevue, so just across the lake from us, sold lettuce, strawberries, and other crops at Pike Place Market. A lot of you probably know what came next. Executive Order 9066 following Pearl Harbor, over 100,000 Japanese Americans incarcerated in concentration camps for the duration of the war. This is where my grandparents were. Tule Lake, years of poverty followed, along with long-lasting trauma. The efforts for redress began in earnest during the Civil Rights Movement. This photo is actually from the Densho archives of the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians. It's from 1980. So if you look at that, and then this letter that was signed by George Bush in 1990, which is a formal apology, that sat framed in my grandparents' house for years and years. My grandparents moved back to Bellevue. Although they were very unwilling to talk about their time in camp, they were really proud of that formal apology letter, and were active in the East Side Historical Society and Bellevue Sister City Group. I actually went to visit Tule Lake a couple years ago. There I am. The generational reverberations of the incarceration, of the Japanese American incarceration, are deeply felt. And despite the act that was passed, the money that was distributed, et cetera, that trauma lasted for generations. It informs the work that I do today, leading me to talk about mass incarceration. It's kind of a hard jump, but here in Washington State, we actually have extremely regressive sentencing policies. So there are more persons serving sentences of life now than there were in prison for all crimes in 1970. The prison population has increased 7-fold during this time period. It won't be news to you, but here in Washington State, Black and Indigenous people are incarcerated disproportionately to their white and Asian peers. We have a really regressive 3-strike system here. We're one of only a handful of states that does this, despite our reputation as a very liberal state. 3 strikes means that you have life in prison. We don't effectively have parole here. So I work for the Washington Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. What can we do? I support criminal defense attorneys, but what the criminal defense attorneys do is work with me to lobby Olympia to make changes. And those changes don't just protect people who've been accused of crimes, but they protect all of us, and they make a better and more just society. So what does it mean that all these people are incarcerated? This is an illustration from one of our magazines that I like. It means kids without parents, people trapped in poverty, broken families. 50% of individuals sentenced to life in prison as persistent offenders are Black. And Black people make up only 4% of the state population. What can we do about it? So this is another illustration. Legislation, lobbying, working with various stakeholders, chipping away at the problem in a very long-term way, much like when we talked about Japanese American redress. So the next slide is actually like super boring, but it's something that's so important. We create all these extremely long handouts that explain the disparities in sentencing, what the disproportionate sentences mean, what is robbery two, what would robbery two, taking it away from the 3 strikes list, mean? And that's what we tried to do 4 years ago, but it had been happening for 17 years. So this is when the bill finally got signed. Robbery 2 gets taken off of the 3 strikes list. Everything's great, except it's kind of not, because it wasn't made retroactive, meaning that all the people who were in prison for a 3 strikes offense, life without parole, still are in prison and have no opportunity to escape, to get out of prison, and might actually die in prison. This is Ramona. She fought to make it retroactive, meaning that there were 100 or so people serving life sentences because of this law. And last year, 2 years later, it got taken off of the 3 strikes list. This is Ramona's Facebook post. I don't know why I blacked out her name because I just told you her name. But she said, 17 years of lobbying to get robbery 2 off the strike list. My inspiration walked out of prison today. And so the point of these 2 stories is that this stuff takes a really long time. And as policymakers, we don't often get to like interact with the people who we're impacting. But we do get to influence things in a way that means that that we're affecting real change, and we're changing real people's lives. And sometimes you have to share a Facebook screenshot to display that. And that's the end of my 2 stories. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Amy. Your first attempt at Pechakucha was great.
Really fast.
That was fantastic.
I'll be better next time.
No, you're great.
Thanks.
We are going to go ahead and move on to James.
I'll say it again. I hate following Amy. She's always so tight. I'm not going to share my screen. But good afternoon, and thank you, students and staff, for the opportunity to share my story and my thoughts on transforming public service. And I'm also really sorry and devastated about the loss of the community. I want to make sure I share that too. It really is a family, and being here with the folks that I actually really appreciate, it's an honor. But my name is James Bush, and I currently serve as the Assistant Superintendent of Equity Partnerships and Engagement for SPS. Seattle is and has always been my home. And if I had my slide deck up, it's a picture of Rainier Beach Community Center. I grew up, and a lot of my life was grounded in that small place in the city where I spent pretty much a lot of my days kind of growing up and kind of being groomed and nurtured by caring adults there. And that was my first entry into understanding public service. But please forgive me for not developing a deck. I've been tasked with a few assignments recently. One is supporting the new operations of our Seattle Public Schools new public health agency. I'm not sure if you guys have heard, we're doing brand new work. And in the last couple of days, I've been serving as a bus monitor, as we've been struggling with kind of how to get kids to school and being a little bit short-staffed. All of that is all transforming public service in very interesting and fun ways. And part of me in my career, as I'm gonna share, it's gonna be a long-winded story, but I've always been a generalist. And when I went to Evans, I was really trying to focus on economic development, and I figured out being a generalist is actually a really good thing, and having people that can run to the ball in multiple different ways and having the tools to be able to do that is really, really important. So talked a little bit about Rainier Beach. At 16, as I got my first job, I was a lifeguard, swim instructor, and rec attendant at Rainier Beach Community Center. And that was the first of my 20 years in public service. Eventually working in Parks and Rec, I eventually became the coordinator at Rainier Community Center in a very diverse neighborhood in Southeast Seattle, and then Garfield Teen Life Center in the CD. in these roles, and Shannon, I didn't know my bio was so deep, so I'm sorry about that. Some of this stuff is going to be a little bit repetitive, so I'm sorry about that for everybody. But in those roles with Parks and Rec, I became a member of the city's Race and Social Justice core team. And in this role, working with Seattle Parks and Rec, I was really focused on developing policies and procedures to make sure that every kid had opportunities like me to have caring adults nurturing them and having safe places for all kids to go. And in making sure that they're equitably distributed, not equally distributed, and making sure that we focus on where we're, like, there are things around staffing that I was focused on. Staffing in Rainier communities, where you had 200 kids at night coming from various backgrounds, versus a kid maybe a Bitter Lake community center. Community centers were the same size, but the needs of both of those centers were completely different. And making sure that we kind of drafted policies where we're actually kind of taking all of those things into account. And all of this work, again, I had a mentor at Seattle Parks and Rec, also an Evans School grad, was like, dude, you need to go back to grad school. You've been talking about this for a long time. You really need to step up and just make the commitment and make it happen. And that exposed the tools and the talents to kind of do some of the work. And I was really pushed by like mentors to just make it happen. And if I had my slide deck open, I had a lot of this was driven because I was really interested in making sure my newborn daughter, Amy, and folks know that I had a baby when I was at Evans School. I was like, I really have to get my act together so I can make sure I do what's right for her and make sure that she has all the opportunities that she needs to have to be successful and all the resources available to kind of make sure all of her friends also have those same opportunities. And not just because I was coming from a privileged position. So in my role in after leaving the Evans School and graduating, and this is where I got to work really close with Amy as a Mayor's Fellow. It was really interesting time, really kind of diving deep. I don't know if the program still exists, but I was able to leverage my experience from Seattle Parks and Rec to eventually go on to work at the city's Human Services Department and later the Department of Neighborhoods. And my experience working with both, coupled with my experience from working on the city's Race and Social Justice core team, coupled with my Evans School experience, I was able to kind of quickly be able to start translating department goals on a whole bunch of different topics, and was always able to kind of center like how we're supporting the most vulnerable communities and that were not typically involved in city processes. And Liz, I'm listening to your story. I'm sure you've been a part of some of those processes too. So at the Department of Neighborhoods, which was really kind of like some of the most kind of important work kind of in my life, really kind of set me up. But really beginning kind of the inclusive outreach and public engagement, I was working directly with actually Brian, who you hear from later, like on items like the city's master plan, neighborhood plans, and community development plans. How are we developing neighborhoods where the communities that are actually from those communities have the opportunity to actually benefit from those communities? Really, really important work. Again, going back to Rainier Beach, I worked a lot on Rainier Beach's neighborhood plan. The Othello Station, a lot of that work, like really working kind of applying my work to home was something that I really cherished. Over the last 5 years, at the school district, I've been able to kind of really build upon that and working and leading the equity, race, and advisory committees that we have, like which are community-based organizations, well, community-based community members and families and CBOs. Like, how are we centering and kind of bringing community voice into the policies that we're working on as a system? And how do I push my colleagues into making sure that we're using and bringing community voice into all of the work that we do has been critical and life-changing for some of the people that we work with. And I'm really not, I'm not taking that lightly. Like some of the work we've done with some of the McKinney-Vento families that have had to deal with crisis, We've had to work and kind of develop policies that centered on those families at Mary's Place and other places to kind of make sure a kid had safety issues. Like, how do we make sure we get transportation from their school? It may not be within our policy and within our perceived jurisdiction, but how do we make sure we transform our system to really focus on those kids that we know need the most support? And sometimes we have taxis and we have process to make sure that we get those folks, but what if you're not a McKinney-Vento kid, which is our federal designation for homeless children? We have kids couch surfing that need to get down the street. And like, how do we make sure that we're focused on that, even if they don't have those federal designations? And for me, long story short, like all of this kind of my work as a generalist and kind of being able to kind of step into different spaces. And it's a little bit of a scatter shot. And I'm not really looking at my talking points now. I'm just kind of just riffing, stopped looking at them a long time ago, but really transforming public policy, being able to get the tools to be able to apply to different places, centering the work on the people that need the most is something that I will continue to kind of dive into and continue to work to kind of galvanize other communities, kind of be able to think a little bit different about their work. And I get to think about boundary changes for schools and like rebalancing districts and all kinds of stuff, lots of interesting stuff. So if anybody wants to volunteer on some work, I'd be happy to kind of engage anybody on the call if they want to learn more and think about a project. And sorry for the last minute pitch, but I appreciate being in space with all of you. Thank you for everything. It's an honor and a pleasure, and look forward to the breakout rooms.
Thank you, James. And thanks to our first 3 storytellers. I feel like I'm hearing a lot of themes, particularly around centering the communities that you're serving. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce who our next 2 storytellers will be. Our next storyteller is going to be Angel Ip. Angel is a project manager for EPA Region 10's Brownfields team, managing grants to clean up contaminated lands in Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. Angel continues to work on environmental health issues of concern to tribes, including addressing health impacts of waste in rural Alaska, including through research, technical assistance, and coordination. She has prior experience at EPA and in research on children's health and public health impacts from climate change. Prior to her work at EPA, Angel worked in multicultural environmental education and outreach, including work in facilitating discussions on social and environmental justice issues, fostering youth-led projects, and bridging access to the arts and the outdoors. She continues to volunteer by peer mentoring, aspiring professionals interested in public service, and ensuring that the environmental field is more diverse and inclusive. Angel earned graduate degrees from the University of Washington in public administration at the Evans School and in exposure science. Brian Surratt is going to be our last storyteller of the evening. Brian is the executive director of LISC Puget Sound. LISC is the Local Initiative Support Corporation, and it's a national community development financial institution with the mission to invest in businesses, affordable housing, health, educational mobility, and employment initiatives to revitalize and stabilize underinvested rural and urban communities across the country. Previously, he was vice president at Alexandria Real Estate Equities, one of the largest developers of life science and technology campuses. And before joining Alexandria Real Estate, Brian was the director of the City of Seattle's Office of Economic Development, where he successfully negotiated the agreement to redevelop the Climate Pledge Arena, the new $1 billion music and professional hockey and basketball venue at Seattle Center, and was the city's policy lead for Seattle's historic efforts as the first major city in the US to raise the minimum wage to $15 per hour. Brian has been recognized by a number of programs, including White House Fellowship programs. Seattle Met Magazine named him one of the 15 people who should really run Seattle, and Puget Sound Business Journal's 40 Under 40. Brian currently is a board member of the Seattle Colleges District, Fair Start, the William D. Ruckelhaus Center, the Seattle Center Foundation, Downtown Emergency Services Center, and Downtown Seattle Association, so not busy at all. He received his BA in philosophy from the University of Tulsa and his MPA from the Evans School. So now we are going to pass things off to Angel, and we're going to begin sharing Angel's slides.
Thank you. I know I have the timer set, I think right now. First, I want to acknowledge the difficult circumstances surrounding today. Today I will be sharing more about what guides me in this work. Oh no, we could just pause for a second. Thank you. I'll be sharing more about what guides me in this work and provide an example for work addressing the health impacts of waste in rural Alaska that is impacting Alaska tribes. Okay, I am ready. This is my first time doing Pecha Kucha. So thank you for bearing with me. Here in EPA, so taking a step back, what are my guiding motivations? What guides me in the work that I do is twofold. Being able to work with communities to address health disparities and environmental inequities, and ensuring that those decisions are informed by communities and community driven, as well as also communities, also including tribes. So key questions that I think about and guides me into the work is: one, who is included when we are making policy? Two, how are the policy needs serving the communities, and what are the gaps within policy? And we'll address all of these today. So taking a step back, I wanted to share that Alaska is the traditional homelands for 229 federally recognized tribes. Mentioning their federal recognition is important because it reminds us of the federal government's responsibility to tribal governments. Many Alaska tribes are off of the road system and are only accessible by boat or plane. So today's need is addressing the health impacts of waste in rural Alaska, notably just even answering the basic question of how are waste sites, which are very near communities, impacting the soil, water, air quality, and potentially subsistence foods. Due to tribes manage their own solid waste management systems, and they're doing the best, but limited resources. So this slide shares more about what a rural Alaska landfill looks like. They're often called class 3 landfills, and they are many communities. There are a mix of different wastes at these sites, everything this slide also shows Alaska landfills and water impacts. Unlined open dumps are common in Alaska. About 3/4 of Alaska village disposal sites are within 1 mile of homes, and up to 30% are within 1/4 mile of homes. Permafrost is melting, so there are serious concerns for water quality and contamination. To reduce volume and manage waste, it's common for many communities to burn their solid waste. These landfills have operated oftentimes without site control or routine maintenance, often due to profound lack of various resources. There are also communities that prefer to collect surface water as drinking water, and the extent of the preference and prevalence is not clear. There's overall just an important need to have more environmental sampling, and there's a lot of limited data within Alaska all around. Although tribes may lack the resources to manage, they are making improvements as they can and as information is provided. So this image shows a honey bucket, and a honey bucket, it is where there's human waste and where collection bins they are dumped into. And many communities use honey buckets as toilets, as there is no piped water for households. In Alaska, there's a tangible nexus between solid waste and human waste challenges. Tribes are also dependent on hunting, fishing, and gathering subsistence as a way of survival. This is an image of a traditional salmon rack, and food purchased in stores is often expensive and may not always be available. There's also a preference for subsistence foods because of the nutritional and health value of these foods greatly exceed that of highly processed commercial products. Unfortunately, sometimes these various waste sites or sites are near where the various subsistence activities may be happening. And that is what is shown here with the drying, fishing BRAC and how it can impact subsistence food activities. And all of this shared in the context of climate change in Alaska, where there are erosion issues and permafrost melting. And this is an extreme example of how climate change and storm surges are impacting one Alaska Native village. And so communities do not always have information to make informed decisions, and boiling down, like, what are the gaps in policy? They are fourfold. There may be a lack of awareness of issues among agencies. There's limited data in Alaska, and as sharing from those images, solid waste impacts many different programs, so it's not often clear who works on what issues. And all around there are resource limitations within the tribes and within agencies. So I'll share more about next steps as to what is happening, and you'll see some artwork from Alaska Native youth on various waste solutions, and sharing this artwork because it's a good reminder that when addressing waste, it's also about working with communities. So the first piece is raising awareness. So what does that mean to address concerns? It means being able to address these different issues internally, externally, and elevating those concerns. We hear from within EPA, from tribes about this need, and it's important to continue to raise and elevate those issues. There's limited data in Alaska. So right now we have, in coordination with EPA Office of Research and Development and working with our partners, over the next 3 years, we will be addressing sampling needs and tackling through research, as well as amplifying opportunities within fellowships for this work. Solid waste, as you can see, like, impacts all ways of life. And so it's been very confusing at times and really requires due diligence to follow up with various programs and collaborators internally and externally. So the approach has been to build a network of collaborators, build your community to address these complex issues. And lastly, there's resource limitations. And the approach is to recognize that there are these challenges and continue to identify and create opportunities, and not forgetting that it's not just about the data sampling, but what might be opportunities to address these various issues through technical assistance and support for tribes. So all in all, what guides me in the work and lessons learned is to not give up, to keep on pushing for what communities are asking for, to be creative and identify those collaborations and partnerships, and remember that, why are we doing this? Does it really need to happen? And the commitment to public service. And I really appreciate this opportunity to share with you, and looking forward to diving deeper in the breakout rooms. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angel. I know that probably felt really fast for you, but I thought that was fantastic, and I really appreciated that type of overview. All right, and now we are going to pass the baton to Brian to finish out with our storytelling.
Great, thank you so very much. I'm going to set my timer to 5 minutes. First of all, I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be here. Just listening to the other folks tell their stories is really powerful, and I'm inspired by that. And I think one common theme that at least hit for me, despite the issues that everyone's working on, there was a personal, we're in public service, but it's motivated by these deep personal sense of justice and whatever your own family stories, your travels, your stories, like this is what propels you. And this is not to disparage, our friends in the business school or engineering or whatnot, but that's what drove us all into service, and that drove us all to the Evans School and joined, and really propelled us to say, in my little slice of the world, can I make an imprint? And I think the stories that are being shared, I think, reflect that. I think for me, what really drives me is something deeply personal. I think when we talk about identity, there's multiple aspects to my identity. I am obviously a male, but my mother is Korean. My father is African American. I was born in Korea. I'm a first generation college graduate. And I have had family members who are literally one college degree, one high school diploma away from criminal justice involvement. And I'm one of the lucky ones that I actually found a way to get through high school, to get through college, to figure out where I'm going to be in this world. And so when that part of my identity has driven me to like think about, the concept of money in the American context and economic mobility, what does that mean? So I've been obsessed with this question, not so much because I want to get wealthy or anything, but just in the richest country in human history, we have massive discrepancies in wealth. And what does that do for us? What does that do for social stability? And Angel's presentation around like, oh my God, when we talk about the level of poverty and its intersection with climate and all these things are I think we're starting to understand how all these things are connected and it's scary because they're so integrated. When I think about my mother, a Korean immigrant, she came to this country in 1980. I was 5 years old. I was born in Korea. I was 5 years old when I came to this country. She was, she didn't have a college degree. She barely made it, out of high school in Korea. But she had to, because she couldn't get into the labor market, she had to take on a lot of different jobs. She was a janitor. She worked in my middle school cafeteria. She was a serial entrepreneur from a donut shop, sandwich shop, whatever she could do to really say, I want to create a sense of economic independence for herself. My father, I grew up in Oklahoma when he retired from the Air Force. We moved to Oklahoma, and I shared that piece because my father's side of the family goes back 3 generations to Oklahoma. And there's a unique piece of American history that is centered in Oklahoma. And I think large parts of America got a glimpse of that history with the storytelling of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Greenwood, and the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. And my family has deep connections to that community. And what people don't realize how that wealth was generated in that community. It was through land. It was through land. And if we all know in the American capitalist context, what is the driving thing for wealth and wealth creation is property and property ownership. And there, our founding of our country, so much was tied to whether or not you were able to have property, your voting rights, the whole shebang is centered around, do you have property? And the reason why my family and African Americans in Oklahoma had property is because after the Civil War, a lot of those enslaved Africans were enslaved by Native American tribes. And after the Civil War, the federal government tore up those treaties, rewrote the treaties, and put those enslaved Africans as members of those tribes with land allotments. So that is just in itself a really crazy story about interracial dynamics and whatnot. But my point is, land was the key. And so my professional journey, and when I think about policy, I wanted to understand a deeper sense of what does money do to people? What does money do to communities? How can it be accessed and leveraged for advancement? Because at the end of the day, for me, whether I worked at the city or my time in the private sector, where I really got an education on how multi-billion-dollar publicly traded companies put together their money to make decisions, that was an eye-opener for me. And in my current role, I explicitly want to get to that question of how do we capture wealth for communities that have been denied that wealth? And again, I want to be careful when I say this, and I tell this to people, not to capture wealth just to capture wealth. But again, in the American context, unless we completely change how all of our structures have been, and I know there's people who want to see that. Unless we change that, there's a question about having that level of security, that intergenerational wealth that, again, allows a certain level of stability for families. Not to amass wealth, just to amass wealth, but you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about that next hospital bill. You don't have to worry about that roof over your head. You don't have to worry about, is my son or daughter going to go to a good school so they can continue up that economic ladder? Because ultimately, that level of security and financial and economic freedom allows the individual to flourish, that individual to find who they really, really are in communities that have that empowerment. And so that's been my the journey from a career standpoint. And that's what I care about from a policy standpoint. And I think folks here, at Devon School are grappling with some of those real big questions. And, this is really the moment. And again, that's my time. That's my story. And like I said, look forward to jumping into the broadcast with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you so much to all of our speakers. That was really inspiring to hear what all you're doing and how you're thinking about things and what your experiences have been. And so I am now going to shift us to